Hello folks! Today's video is something a little bit different. I'm going to basically talk you through the process of creating a book cover, and my process has changed a little bit recently, even as recently as the past few weeks. So yeah, I thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of document that, and I always find that I pick up different things when I'm seeing different people's processes. So if that's something you're interested in, then keep watching. So as you'll see here, I didn't go through a lot of different thumbnails. Normally I would do a lot more than this, especially if it was for a client job. But in this case, I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted it to look like in my head before I started. And I was really happy with how this thumbnail looked, so I didn't do a whole lot of them. But yeah, I normally would try and do at least 5 thumbnails, if not more, and then develop those into sort of more developed concepts and then send that to a client. But that's the beauty of doing a personal project like this. So the typography style, the lettering style I'm working in here is called black letter or Gothic, and it's a type of calligraphy. So I started off using a calligraphy brush, which gives you those angles. I can't remember where I got it from, but you can get them, especially for Procreate. And yeah, it just keeps everything on that, is it 40-degree angle? There are different brushes with different angles, but yeah, it gives you sort of a guideline to start with. And then I moved into the lettering side of it. So I'm not very good with calligraphy at all, so I didn't do it as a calligrapher would. I drew the letters instead, but having those calligraphy brushes as a guideline was really helpful. And then what I do is basically draw over and trace and retrace the design. That's what you're seeing here. That's of course the beauty of working on the iPad, is that you can do that very easily with layers. You can also do this in Photoshop. When I've done some teaching on lettering in the past, I've actually got people to do it with pen and paper on either tracing paper or something like baking paper, which is very inexpensive. I find tracing paper is quite pricey, so that's a nice way of doing it without the cost, and yeah, it gets the same effect. So as you can see there, I was just sort of playing around with different elements and seeing what worked compositionally. And I'll come back and do more on the typography later, but I don't like to do all of the typography and then all of the illustration, because they have to work hand in hand. So that's what you'll see me doing here, is going back and forth between the two a bit. And yeah, I was basically working directly from that sketch and building on that. And you'll see I add some more detail very shortly. It's also quite helpful with lettering, I find, to look at it in the negative and look at it upside down. It just really helps you to see the blind spots and where it isn't working compositionally. That's been super valuable over the years, and it's something that I wish I'd done more of earlier on. So yeah, here you can see I'm adding more detail. And yeah, this takes a little while, but I like to get as much detail as I can in there without sort of overwhelming the design. And this has got sort of a spidery, almost vein-like look to it. The reason I chose the Magic Flute is because it is a wonderful opera and a kind of crazy story, but it's got these really fantastical elements to it. It starts off with one of the main characters being chased by a dragon or a serpent, so it's got lots of drama and yeah, fantastical things happening. And the reason I wanted to do that was because I love fantasy and wanted to have things that I could potentially sell in my shop, so things that are outside of copyright. But yeah, I felt like I had exhausted the well-known fairy tales, and I wanted to do something that wasn't a fairy tale, basically. And then yeah, I had a bit of a brainwave to do an opera or two. So this one is by Mozart, and it's yeah, probably one of the most famous operas out there, but I would quite like to do some others. I might do A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is obviously Shakespeare, but there is an opera of that, so it'd be nice to do a series of these. But I don't know if anyone in my audience actually knows or cares about opera. I'm not a huge opera fan or opera goer, but I do love classical music. Was kind of raised on it. So this is combining some of my other nerdy passions with art. So here I am just filling in some different illustration elements, and yeah, they're on a separate layer to those leafy bits, and just adding in some different things. So the flute, you'll see, started off as being kind of maybe a piccolo. It's hidden away in behind the leaves, but then I decide to make it longer in a bit. And yeah, all the colours I'm working with at this point are very much arbitrary. I'm just making it up as I go along, and it doesn't really matter at this stage what the colours are, because I know I'm going to change everything at the end. Again, another beauty of working in digital. So here again, I am going back over the typography, redrawing it, just refining it a little bit more. I'm not making too many changes at this point, but you'll see with the bar of the F, I made it a little bit smaller there. And here I'm hiding different elements in underneath to get that layering effect, and doing the same with the typography. I wanted it to feel really integrated with these leaves and have quite a sort of explosive feel to it. It's all coming from the center there. So whenever I do something like this, I will keep a copy of the layer at the bottom and hidden, just so that I've still got that as a reference if I mess up. And yeah, here I'm playing around with some colours. I had a fairly good idea of what I wanted colour-wise from the beginning, which was definitely that sort of deep navy blue. A lot of it is set during the night, and the Queen of the Night is one of the main characters, and the whole opera is a lot about light and dark. So having that dark background was pretty important. I think here I'm adding some glitter into the leaves, and that's using something called a clipping mask. And yeah, again, just making little adjustments along the way, integrating the text a bit more. And yeah, the clipping masks allow me to add like a texture over the top, which gives it a lot more depth and oomph, if you like. Yeah, then I've got different brushes I'm playing around with here. I knew I wanted some kind of texture in the background, but it took me a little while to figure out what that was going to be. And as you can see, it sort of ended up being like a galaxy or star effect. And then I think I go in shortly and add a bit more depth to that as well. Here we go. So the flute is being extended, which I think just balances out that composition much better than before. Again, integrating it with the flowers. With a layered piece like this, there's quite a lot of erasing pieces as you go. There are only, because I'm working in quite a high resolution here, there are only so many layers you're allowed to have, so I've got to merge down some as I go. I think, what size was this? It's the right size for an Art of Wear notebook. So it's 198 by 264 millimeters, and I think I'm working in 450 dpi. I will work at as high a dpi as possible without only being allowed a very few layers. DPI stands for dots per inch, so that's basically the resolution of it, and I want to be able to scale it up if I need to. It just gives me a bit more wiggle room. You definitely don't want to end up with pixelated parts. So yeah, just adding more depth here. You can see I've added a bit of a drop shadow or a 3D effect to the text. And here I copy and pasted all of the outlines and merged them down into one layer. And I'm just filling it all in with black. And this is to create a shadow that will go underneath everything and give it, again, a bit more of a 3D effect. And it makes it look almost like it's made of paper and it's paper cutouts. So you can now see around the bottom edges there's like a black outline or a black shadow. Just, again, gives it a bit more oomph, which seems to be the word of the day. And yeah, then with colours, it took a while to get the colours just right. I knew I wanted something that really was complementary to the blue, so using oranges, something quite warm to make it really stand out from the blue. Oh, here we are, adding stars. Here I'm using some brushes I got from Design Cuts. It's a shimmer set, which is very beautiful, and I will link below. And then it was a question of how many stars are too many stars. So I tend to go with, I'm going to go completely over the top and then sort of work backwards and yeah, pare it back to where it's at a more sensible level. And again, using those brushes around the flute to make it more magical, I guess. And here I'm just going in and adding a clipping mask and drawing onto the clipping mask to create a bit more depth and add some shadows. So you'll notice this is quite subtle, but underneath some of the leaves I'm adding in a little bit of shadow, and under the text, again, just to make it a bit more three-dimensional, to feel like these are all separate elements that are integrating together. Yeah, so you can see it up the top now. I'm adding in a little bit of shadow and under the text. Pretty subtle, but I think it makes a really big difference. And we are nearly finished here. But it's just these little things that actually take up quite a lot of the time, but make a really big difference in the end. So usually with a piece like this, I will end up spending quite a bit of time. I'd say the last quarter maybe of the time I spend on it just sort of titivating and making little changes, subtle changes that just give it the emphasis in the places where it needs it. So thank you very much for watching. If you want to see more content like this, then please feel free to subscribe and or follow me on Instagram, because that's where I post more stuff like this, more of my process and more images and little videos of what I'm doing. But yeah, I do studio vlogs on here as well, so a bit more of my day-to-day. It's not usually just focused on one piece. This is a new thing, but if you like this format, please let me know down in the comments. I'd love to know if you made it to the end and you're interested in this kind of thing. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!